There are some places you think are a safe haven, but the moment you step inside, you sense a silence watching you. I had gone there to find peace, but within the first week, I realized that the silence around the cabin didn't belong to me. I had rented the cabin years ago. The owner was an old man who had moved to Florida and leased it cheaply to occasional visitors. That year, I had come to pull myself together. It had been raining non-stop for 2 days. I usually like rain, especially in the forest. The heavy sound of it hitting the roof always calmed me. But that day, something in that rain unsettled me. In the morning, when the rain eased a little, I went outside. The pile of wood next to the cabin had been completely scattered. There didn't seem to be any dry branches left. Still, I walked toward the pine trees, hoping I might find something usable. I heard the sound as I bent down to gather the wet branches. A faint rustling. I looked up. Someone stepped out from between the trees. He was thin. He wore a faded coat and a hat with a worn brim. The rain was still drizzling, but the man looked strangely dry. Our eyes met suddenly. In that moment, a strange feeling washed over me. You know that sense when you see someone for the first time but feel like you've seen them before? That kind of feeling. I was sure I had never seen his face, but something in his eyes said, "I know you." His lips twitched slightly. A small, dull movement that resembled a smile, but wasn't quite a smile. I didn't say anything. "Hey, need some help?" Crossed my mind, but for some reason I held it back. Without taking his eyes off me, the man turned toward the right side of the forest. There was a thick patch of bushes there that no one used. As far as I knew, there was neither a path nor a road beyond that point. I just stood there for a while. I stood with the branches in my hand, staring into that part of the forest. For someone to walk in that direction, they would have had to choose a very strange route. "He's probably from around here," I said to myself. "A hunter or some mountain man who knows the terrain." I tried to shrug that moment off as a minor oddity, but I couldn't. I wandered around the cabin all day. I opened a book, couldn't get past the first page. I kept looking out the window, especially toward those bushes on the right. No movement, no shadow, no sound. But my thoughts were stuck there. Toward evening, the rain picked up again. "Your head is too full," I told myself. "If you were in the city, you'd see hundreds of strangers and not think twice. Here, you see one man and start getting paranoid." Still, the uneasiness inside me didn't go away. As night fell, I picked up a book. I liked leaning back in the chair and reading a few pages to the sound of the rain. The cabin glowed with orange light. The flames from the fireplace danced on the walls, filling the room with warmth, but also a thick, heavy smell of smoke. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't look at my phone. I was saving the battery anyway. I just kept turning the pages, listening deeply. It happened just as I was sinking into that atmosphere. There was a knock at the door. At first, I thought I had misheard. I slowly set the book down and listened closely. 3 sharp knocks came again. This cabin's door isn't thin. It's a thick, heavy wooden door. When someone knocks, it echoes solid and clear. That sound instantly drowned out the crackling fireplace and the rain. A lump formed in my throat. I slowly got up. I walked to the door. I looked through the peephole. The man from that morning. Same hat, same face, same pale skin. But one detail was even more unsettling. He still didn't seem to have a single drop of moisture on him. Yet outside, the rain had intensified enough to form puddles on the porch. "I'm lost," he said in a flat voice. His lips moved, but his eyes didn't shift at all. It was like the voice came from somewhere else, and he was only moving his mouth to match it. "Can I stay the night?" My throat went dry. Normally, I would have said something like, "The nearest town is that way," or "There's no reception, but we can sort it out in the morning." But the only thing that came out of my mouth was, No. The man paused for a moment. Then he slowly stepped back. The sound of his footsteps. I pulled the curtain slightly to watch him from the window. He walked straight into the darkness of the forest. The first thing I did was barricade the door. I dragged the heavy table in front of it and wedged a chair beneath the handle. There was a hunting rifle the previous owner had left hanging on the wall. Normally it felt like decoration. That moment, I picked it up. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. For nearly 10 minutes, I waited by the door, the rifle on my lap. Then something else happened. A sound came from the back. It was as if something thick and heavy was dripping from somewhere. It blended with the rain, but it was different. No rhythm, just sporadic drops. And then a cold memory rushed through me. Behind the cabin, there was an old stone well I hadn't used in years. The day I arrived, I had noticed it while wandering around a moss-covered stone circle where the ground had sunken slightly, with a half-rotted wooden lid in the center. It had lingered in the back of my mind since then, but I had never given it any real meaning. I just saw it as an old, useless well. Now, however, I knew that muffled dripping was coming from right there. I gripped the rifle tighter. The corridor leading to the back window felt longer than before. At the end of the corridor, there was a small window facing the rear. I stood in front of it, my breathing quickened. The sound outside halted for a moment. Then I heard something very clearly. It was as if a heavy wooden lid had been lifted slightly, then set back down, then silence. I opened the curtain just a finger's width. The well's lid was raised about half a centimeter. I waited with the rifle ready until morning. When morning came, I followed the tracks. They all ended at the bottom of the well. I didn't see anyone that day, but the silence around the cabin, it felt like someone was still wandering nearby. I packed my things before evening. I couldn't stay there anymore. As I closed the door, I noticed a faint scratch at the bottom. As if someone had been probing under the door, I jumped into my car and drove away from there. I don't know who that man was. I have no idea what he was searching for in the well. But I know one thing for sure. If I had opened the door that night, maybe they would have found me at the edge of that well. Or maybe they wouldn't have found me at all. Some nights, you feel like someone is watching you, but you don't have the courage to turn and check. I looked that night, and I wish I hadn't. That night was exactly like that. I live in a small neighborhood outside the city. As winter approaches, it almost turns into a ghost town. You can't see anyone walking the streets, not even during the day. There are only a few houses around me, and most have been empty for a long time. At first, I liked that silence. But lately, that silence has started to feel like pressure. The house seems to shrink at night. The walls feel like they're closing in. Even my own breathing sometimes sounds too loud in my ears. I haven't stepped outside for days. Every morning, the same coffee, the same chair, the same window. Routine feels like safety, but if it lasts long enough, it becomes a maddening cycle. That evening was no different. The TV was on, but I wasn't really watching it. The flickering images on the screen moved slowly across the dim room, casting tired shadows on the walls. Hot coffee in my hand, blanket over my knees, the wind swirled around the house, sometimes striking the roof, sometimes the windows. The room, resisting the storm outside, was wrapped in a steady warmth. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something. In the window of that empty house on the hill across from mine, a light flickered on and off. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. That house had been up for sale for months. Its windows were dusty, its porch boards rotten, its yard overgrown with weeds. No one had lived there for a very long time. Probably just lightning reflecting, I told myself. But a few seconds later, the light flickered on and off again, then again, and again, each time with the same timing, exactly like someone sending a signal with a flashlight. In that moment, a strange uneasiness settled over me. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. I turned back to the TV, sipped my coffee, but that light felt burned into my mind. I grabbed the remote and lowered the TV volume. The rain had begun. At first tapping lightly on the window, then growing heavier with the wind. I walked toward the window. Slowly I pulled the curtain aside. The light was gone. But right then, I realized something inside me had shifted. Even the air in the house felt different. I stepped back. I took a deep breath, and at that exact moment, a silhouette appeared in front of the dark window. I froze. It wasn't moving. Its head was tilted to the side. It looked like it was watching me from afar. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I knew someone was staring at me. Some things you don't have to see to understand. You just feel them. The weight of that gaze pressed straight into my chest. I quickly closed the curtain and stumbled backward. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and spilled across the carpet. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I was wrong, I whispered. I'm sure I was wrong. But deep inside, in the quietest place, something told me someone had really been standing there. The silence in the house suddenly grew heavy. The sound of rain, the howl of the wind, and the echo of my heartbeat. Minutes passed. Then a sound came from outside. A click, as if one of the garden fences was being pushed open. Or someone had stepped onto it. What followed is what took that night away from me. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps over wet ground. Slowly approaching, then stopping right in front of my door. 2 sharp, short knocks, like someone quietly saying, "I'm here." I froze. Everything in the house fell silent. I didn't even breathe. The ticking of the wall clock raced alongside my heartbeat. There were no more knocks. The rain intensified, and the wind slammed into the doorframe. But then, everything fell silent again. In that instant, it felt like the entire town had disappeared. No cars, no barking dogs. Only me, just me, and whatever stood behind that door. I couldn't move for a long time. Then, with my hand trembling, I slightly opened the curtain. The house across the street was completely dark. But something in the middle of the street drew my attention. An umbrella. Closed, black, dripping wet. My eyes narrowed, and my heartbeat spiked again. It was my umbrella. The one I had left on the porch. The one I thought I had lost a few days earlier. In that moment, every bit of logic collapsed. I was forced to accept that someone had come here, walked into my yard, taken my umbrella, and left it right in front of my door. Just then, a sound came from the back of the house. A metallic scrape, like someone trying a door handle. Instinctively, I turned off the light. The house instantly fell into darkness. Only the sound of rain remained. For some reason, breathing felt easier in the dark. Feeling unseen made me feel safer. Then silence. Then again. A click. This time much closer. My heart pounded in my ears. I reached for my phone, but the screen was black. The battery was dead. The generator hummed faintly in the distance, but it seemed to be running more weakly, more timidly than usual. I stood there for a while. Then I slowly sat on the couch, covering my mouth with my hands. I just listened. After a while, everything fell quiet. No footsteps, no clicks, no wind, just silence. And that silence was more frightening than anything else. As time passed, it felt like someone was breathing behind the walls. A shadow slipped past the window. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks. Maybe it wasn't. But I didn't react. I didn't move. I just waited until the morning, without blinking. When the sun finally rose, the rain had stopped. Everything looked as ordinary as it should. But the silence left from the night still clung to the house. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee, my hands shaking. I looked outside. The street was empty. The house across the way was still dark, but there was something in the middle of the road, an umbrella. Jet black, closed, dripping wet. And it was mine. I walked slowly to the door. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, then looked outside. There was a soaked piece of paper on the doormat. The writing was still legible despite the rain. "Why did you look at me last night?" I couldn't take another step. I picked up the paper, closed the door, and locked it tight. My heart felt like it was caught in my throat. I kept the curtains closed the entire day. My umbrella was gone again. The paper stayed on the table. When evening arrived, darkness covered everything outside once more. And I, with my coffee in hand, looked toward that window again. There was no light. But I could swear that someone was still watching me from within that darkness. I experienced this event in 2022. The rain hadn't let up since early morning. I work at a cheap burger chain on the outskirts of town. During the day, I'm in the kitchen, sometimes at the register in the evenings, and at night I do delivery. When the manager gets a call for overtime, he usually calls me first. I don't have the luxury of saying no. That night, I had signed up for extra hours. As closing time approached, the rain intensified. Even the restaurant's neon sign looked muffled behind the curtain of water. The wet marks on the floor were like the only memory of the few customers who had come and gone. The manager wrote on a paper slip, tore it from the cash register, and handed it to me. "Last order," he said. "Take this, then we're closing." "It's a bit far, but not too far. The navigation says 20 minutes. You'll get there in 15. He told the same lie he always told. "Maybe the guy will be nice," he added. I grabbed the food bag from the counter and got into the car. I secured my phone to the holder on the steering wheel. As we moved away from the city center, the roads began to empty. First, the traffic slowed down. Then it stopped completely. The buildings became sparse, with only a few grocery stores and 24-hour gas stations left behind. After a while, the signs became sparse. The signs showing fuel prices and exit numbers decreased, then disappeared altogether. The streetlights also seemed to disappear in the same order. Suddenly, there was only as much road as my headlights illuminated. The surroundings were bare darkness seeping through the rain. The navigation stopped talking for a while. The blue line on the phone screen still stretched ahead, but there was nothing around me. No houses, no warehouses, not even a pair of headlights. Just the smell of wet earth, branches whipped by the wind, and mud splatters falling in front of the headlights. Although the time in the corner of the screen had reset to 0, it felt like I had already passed 20 minutes. It was as if the app had stopped counting time at some point, but expected me not to notice. The road narrowed. It gave way to a muddy, dark surface. I thought to myself, it's probably a house in the countryside. In this part of America, there were houses scattered on the outskirts of the city, barely visible on the map. Some didn't even have a zip code, but they wanted burger deliveries right to their door. Maybe it'll be a nice guy, I said to myself. Still, I felt a small, tight knot in my stomach. After a while, a place that looked like the end of the road appeared. The darkness in front of the headlights slowly opened up. It was as if the trees had been pulled away, leaving their place to a wide, muddy clearing. As if something had once started here and been left unfinished. A half-finished construction site or an abandoned development project. There was a single pole in the middle, rusty, leaning, with no light or sign on it. When the headlights hit it, a thin shadow seemed to lean over the road. Just then, the navigation beeped. It spoke in a metallic, soulless voice. "You have reached your destination." I didn't know where to park the car because there was nothing in front of me. No houses, no cars, no people, just the rain-beaten emptiness and the shadow of that pole. I didn't turn off the engine. The headlights stayed on, and in the silence, only the occasional squeak of the wipers could be heard. The darkness stood like a wall at the edge of the headlights, hiding what lay beyond. Just as I was thinking, they must have entered the wrong address. My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. A message had popped up from the app. "Customer note, I'm here. Don't turn off the headlights, I'm coming." I looked into the void beyond the headlights. I couldn't see any movement in the rain, but that little knot inside me tightened, as if someone had reached in and squeezed it a little harder. The moment I read that message, something indescribable tightened inside me. I wiped the fog from the window with my arm. Raindrops slid across the headlights like white lines. At first glance, there was nothing there. Then, a few seconds later, I noticed it. At the very edge of the headlights, where the light ended, a dark shape appeared. At first, I thought it was a trick of the rain, because it didn't seem to be moving. But then that darkness shifted slightly. A silhouette slowly, with heavy steps, it emerged. It was soaking wet. Its coat clung to its body, its hair matted with rain. But what really froze me was that it stood there without showing its face from the darkness. Its head wasn't bowed, its shoulders weren't slumped. It stood right in front of me, looking at me. At that moment, I noticed something. He wasn't tall. He didn't look like a countryman. But there was no hurry in his steps. At this hour, in this rain, in this emptiness, I felt my car's interior shrink. The man took another step. When he came in front of the headlights, his face suddenly turned white. But it wasn't a healthy whiteness. It was like a face with the blood drained from it. His eyes were wide open, huge, unblinking, neither angry nor scared. Just there, like an empty screen watching someone. As I looked through the window, I noticed my breathing quicken. I reflexively reached for the door lock. It was already locked, but I pressed it anyway. I wanted to hear that solid, reassuring click inside. Then the man raised his hand. He made a brief gesture in the air, as if to say, "Come." But he didn't take a step. He was just calling. Just then, my phone vibrated again. This time it was an app notification. "Your order was delivered by another driver." Below it was a small red warning. "System error? Wrong address?" Something cold fell into the pit of my stomach. I slowly lifted my head from the phone. The man was still there. He put one hand in his pocket. At that moment, all the fear inside me turned into reflex. I grabbed the gear shift, took my foot off the brake, and pressed the gas. The wheels spun in the mud, and the car swayed sideways for a moment. The man didn't move. He just watched, calm, as if he knew where I was going. I reversed and headed for the entrance to the road. The rain was so heavy that the wipers couldn't keep up, and the windshield was almost completely blurred. My heartbeat was louder than the engine. When I reached the beginning of the road, I couldn't resist looking in the mirror. The man was still there alone, motionless. But this time, farther away from the headlights, a second shadow stirred in the darkness. A hand, a shoulder. Before I could make it out, the rain swallowed the image at that moment. All I wanted was to see the city lights. When my phone started to connect, the screen lit up. Notifications came back. The signal was strong, but there was something else on the screen. Route completed. Delivery failed. A calm message, as if everything I had experienced that night was just a system glitch. My breathing was still uneven when I parked the car. As I left the house, I looked up at the rainy roof. The darkness was there as always, but something inside me had taken a piece of that night away the next day. I called the company. They said the address had been deleted from the system years ago, that no one lived there anymore. There was silence on the phone for a moment. Finally, the employee added, "If someone is there, they're not in our records." At that moment, I understood. It wasn't the navigation system's fault. The mistake was that someone was still there.